thank you again all for joining. So I've actually been looking forward to this particular conversation. We've been doing these webinars for, I think, 7 or 8, maybe 7 months or so now. And I've been looking forward to this one for a long time. We had this planned out for this month of the year. And we have a couple of speakers here today with us that are going to go through this with us. The reason I'm so interested, it's an under talked about topic. It is something that I talk about, my colleagues talk about oftentimes in presentations we make, but we're not experts, right? We're just trying to convey to people that the subject of money and Islamic finance doesn't end at your death. It continues on. And what I like to say is that I tell family and friends and whoever will listen to me that, as let's say you're a practicing Muslim who's trying to pray 5 times a day, you went to Hajj already, you're fasting 30 days of Ramadan, you're being good to your parents and to anyone around you, you're giving your zakat, right? You're doing all the things you're supposed to do, but you did not take care of your will or trust. So you took care of all your obligations, but not the one that still exists after your death, right? Is just as important to take care of those things as well. You just have to plan for it, but we'll give you the benefit of the doubt. It might be that you just don't know this information yet. And that's what we're going to try to get to today. It is a weighty topic, so we're going to try to get to as much of it as possible. I have 2 speakers here with me today. I personally invited them because I've gotten to know some of the work that they do, and they're, very good at speaking as well, which is also a good thing for webinars like this. So Yaser Ali is a wealth planning attorney in Tempe, Arizona. He's the co-author of the American Bar Association's Practice Guide on Estate Planning for the Muslim Client. He is a trusted counselor and advisor to business owners and families with all of their corporate, tax, philanthropic, and estate planning needs. Since founding the firm in 2015, Yaser is proud to have planned hundreds of millions of dollars of assets for his clients and structured tens of millions in sophisticated charitable gifts. We also have Amina Saeed. She's an attorney in private practice in Illinois. She provides extensive estate and tax planning services to individuals and businesses. She's been an attorney since 1996 and devotes her practice exclusively to estate and legacy planning. She's a member of the prestigious American Academy of Estate Planning Attorneys, and she's a member of the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys, and has been appointed to the Illinois State Bar Association section on trust and estates. She is admitted to practice law before the Supreme Court of Illinois, as well as the U.S. District Court. Amina earned her Bachelor's of Arts degree from Loyola University, Chicago, her Juris Doctorate or JD from Valparaiso University School of Law, and a Master of Laws degree from the John Marshall Law School. She's married with 4 children, and she tries to balance her spare moments between baseball, field hockey, scouting, and her family's passion to visit all 62 national parks. So hopefully she was able to do some of that during this pandemic as well. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to first ask Yaser this question. So tell me about the work you do and your area of expertise, Yaser.
Sure. Assalamu alaikum, and thanks for having me. It's an honor to join and to be with all of you. As you mentioned, wealth planning and estate planning, what we do is we're basically one of the few times you see an attorney when you're not in trouble. And we think about how to help our clients protect and plan their assets. So that's during your lifetime in terms of protection of the wealth that you've accumulated. And then how do you pass that on? Whether that's in the form of lifetime gifts to others, charitable donations, or upon our death, and all of us at one point or another are going to die, how do we transfer that wealth in an intelligent, efficient, tax optimized manner? And then layering on top of that, for me, most of my clients are Muslim clients that we're looking to overlay Islamic inheritance rules into that plan. So that's kind of the crux of what we do, and that intersection of Sharia compliance and then utilizing all of the conventional tools that exist to an estate planning attorney to facilitate that process.
Perfect. And I think that's why people are listening today, for that very thing. Amina, same question to you. Tell us about the work that you do in your area of expertise. I think we got some of it from your bio.
All right. So in terms of the work I do, I help people take care of the two most important aspects of their lives, everyone that they love and everything that they own. I've been practicing estate planning law for a very long time. I've been an attorney for 25 years in Chicago and suburban Illinois. And my interest in estate planning developed based on three different experiences that I have had. First, I used to work for a government agency in Chicago where I saw firsthand what happens to children when they're exposed to the foster care system. You know, if parents pass away, what happens, children end up in foster care. And from that experience, I realized the importance of parents having a will in place and short-term guardianships in place so that if they do pass away suddenly, that their children will not end up in foster care. Secondly, after 9/11, I took a break from practicing law to join a nonprofit organization as its director so that I could be part of our nation's healing process. I did a lot of community advocacy during that time, and I realized that the key to a nonprofit organization's success is having planned giving programs in place so that for the long term, they can have a vision for the future and develop into a very successful nonprofit. So when I returned to practicing law, I decided estate planning is how I can accomplish both of these goals because I want to leave the world a better place. And I do that by practicing estate planning in all of its related fields. Our goal at our law firm is to build long-term relationships with each of the families that we serve. We want to be the trusted advisor for each family when a mom and dad are there. When something happens to mom and dad, we want to be there for the children. We do that with estate planning, asset protection, charitable planning, special needs planning, and all the other aspects of related to estate planning.
Yeah, and I think we're going to get to that as well because, you know, let's say myself and my wife, we create a will, trust both of them, and something happens to one of us. There's, you know, if I'm working with you, Amina, or with you, Yaser, I'm going to be having those conversations. My wife and I are. But upon my death, the children are going to need to be involved. And then what happens after that? Really, you're going to have a long-term experience and relationship with the entire family. So, you know, you had mentioned something, Amina, that during the COVID-19 pandemic, it's more important than ever to, you know, consider estate planning. What did you mean by that when we were talking?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So first of all, let me explain exactly what estate planning is. A lot of people get nervous when they hear that term and they think, oh, no, I don't need estate planning. I just need a simple will. It's important to understand exactly what that concept means. Estate planning is a term that means that you have a plan in place to take care of everyone you love and everything you own. For Muslims, this is a required religious obligation. We are all required to have an estate plan in place. It's essential, especially during the pandemic, because of the high risk of hospitalization and death across the country. We're all seeing the tragedies unfold, right? We're seeing people ending up on ventilators, seeing people dying, young people dying. Someone has to step in. If a person is sick, if they're in the hospital, they're on a ventilator, someone has to step in and make decisions on that sick person's behalf. If you haven't decided who will make those decisions for you, then depending on the state that you live in, guardianship may be required for someone to step in and take care of your affairs for you and take care of your family on your behalf. That guardianship is a court process where your loved ones have to file a petition in court, ask a judge to appoint a guardian on your behalf. That process is time consuming, it's costly, and it opens up a person's private affairs to the court and to public scrutiny. All of that can be easily avoided with proper executed documents. So a properly drafted estate plan will make sure that you and your loved ones are taken care of if you get sick and you pass away. It will include a bunch of different documents. Generally speaking, almost all Americans need the following documents as part of their estate plan, right? So whether we're in the pandemic or not, you should have these documents in place. But especially during the pandemic, it is even more important. First of all, you should have a healthcare power of attorney that identifies who can make healthcare decisions for you in the event that you cannot make your own healthcare decisions. It should also identify your wishes regarding organ donation and your wishes regarding life support. What should someone do if you are on a ventilator or if you are on some other form of life support? Secondly, you need to have a HIPAA authorization, which identifies who exactly can have access to your medical records, and making sure that your loved ones will have access to your medical records if they ever need them. Without that in place, because of the HIPAA laws, hospitals are going to be very reluctant to share any information with your family.
Right.
Next thing, everybody should have a financial power of attorney to identify who can take care of all your financial affairs in the event that you can't take care of your own. You need to have a will to identify who will receive all your assets in the event that you pass away, or at the time you pass away, I should say. Also, you need a will if you have minor children, because the will is where you identify who will become guardians for your children in the event that you get sick, you pass away, and you can't take care of your own kids. Who's going to do that for you? It's important that you make that decision rather than a judge making that decision. If you don't have it in writing, a judge is going to end up making that decision, and they may not choose the person whom you would have wanted. Now, the other thing that's important to have in place is beneficiary designations especially for retirement accounts, IRAs, 401ks, 403bs, life insurance policies, bank accounts, brokerage accounts, anything that allows you to have a beneficiary designation. You need to make sure it's up to date. Make sure that all your kids are on there as secondary beneficiaries if you have your spouse as the primary beneficiary. All too often, I see people who have a primary beneficiary, but then when I ask them, who's your secondary or contingent beneficiary, they give me a blank look like, huh, what are you talking about? Because it's never something that was brought up to them. So it's important to have that secondary beneficiary.
I think that's the great point as well, because, you know, even here at Saturna Capital, we do have beneficiary forms that you can select who your primary beneficiary is and then who your secondary beneficiary is. What that really means in practicality, just to slow it down here and get to the real basics, right? If you, let's say I have one person as the primary beneficiary and we're friends, we're long-term friends. And so they're the beneficiary of my bank account, but you know, we both pass away together. If there was no secondary beneficiary, then it's not going to be as effective. But let's say you had a secondary beneficiary, it's my other friend. So if one of my friends, the primary beneficiary, and we pass away at the same time, now it's going to go to the secondary beneficiary. And you can split it up, you know, different percentages. Staying on the basics, Yaser, I want to ask you and really get to something here that, you know, I think is basically like the first thing people think about when they think about, you know, coming up with a will or a trust, right? Which one do I need and why? Like what? You know, like and I think it might be different for a 20-year-old or a 22-year-old coming out of college and just starting their employment versus somebody that's 45 versus somebody that's 80. So if you can just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, you know, Amina mentioned the necessity of having a will. I think that's something that everyone should have. And it functions in a way that, particularly if you've got young children, right? Who's going to be the guardians of the children? And it says who's going to be in charge of my estate and and how is the wealth going to be distributed. It's a relatively simple document. Mm-hmm. But what it doesn't do, and particularly for probably most of us on the call that are interested in Islamic perspective of how do I ensure that my wealth passes according to Sharia and the Islamic rules. Now, the question or the challenge of relying on a will is that a will has structurally it's limited in that it doesn't cover anything that has a joint ownership with a right of survivorship. So for most people, they've got a house, they've got a brokerage account, a bank account. And if you're married, you've got a husband and wife on it. Something happens to one of you, it's automatically going to go to the other person, right? With the beneficiary designations that you just alluded to on the retirement accounts or different types of insurance policies and whatnot, there's usually beneficiary designations, and those pass automatically regardless of what your will says. So in essence, the contract will trump the will. So if a person is married and, especially before Hajj, a lot of people, prepare their wills, it's customary. And the assumption is that you fulfilled a religious obligation. Well, in reality, you haven't ensured that the wealth is going to pass according to Sharia, because it's going to go 100% to the surviving spouse. And then they would just have an ethical duty then to distribute the wealth further. So for most people, and then to the extent that the will does have an impact and does govern, the other limitation is that the assets have to go through probate. So there's this court process where you submit the will to the judge or the county clerk, and then they review it, they approve it, and then all the distributions have to be administered through that process, which generally, some states are better than others, but in general, it's an inefficient process. It's an expensive process, and it's an avoidable process. And so for most people, Muslim or not, probate avoidance is one of the reasons they go to an estate planning attorney, is they want to ensure that we don't have to go through the court process. Some people describe probate like a lawsuit against yourself, right? It's just totally unnecessary. All of the stuff has to then be, reporting obligations and such to the court. And then that second piece, like I said, from an Islamic perspective, is if we create a trust, which is what I think probably most people that have some savings, some assets, married couple that are, into their career at some point, are probably going to be better suited with the trust. It's not just something for really rich people anymore, right? It's a bucket. It's a tool we utilize to essentially manage assets while we're alive. And so you put your assets inside of the trust, you transfer them, you retitle accounts, you can make the trust a beneficiary, and then everything inside of that trust can be administered the way you want. And so for Muslims, that means we can embed within the trust itself the Islamic inheritance rules that are laid out in the Quran explicitly. And you mentioned this at the outset. This is really the only obligation that we're responsible for after our death, right? And this is the only obligation that is expressly articulated in the Quran in detail. And so we can include and embed all of those things within the trust instrument, such that, upon our death, this person will be in charge and the assets will be distributed, in this manner. And we can provide sub-trusts for the kids to, have their wealth protected until certain ages. And we can include charitable provisions within there. So it's a very, very versatile, flexible vehicle. I would say almost all of my clients, we do trust planning. There are situations surely where, a will is adequate, but a trust is almost always going to be the better solution.
And what is the reason that people, give us the religious context behind this, right? The urgency of creating a will or a trust. Because when I speak to people, if there's a room of 50 people and I ask them who has created one of these, I might get 10% of them to raise their hand. It's really surprising. So what is the religious reasoning behind this?
It's interesting you raise that point. I think nationwide, the statistics show that a majority of people don't have an estate plan in place. And that's the general public. I obviously pre-COVID had the fortune of visiting a lot of different Muslim communities like yourself. And I think 10% is on the high end of the estimate. And it's ironic because, it's a religious obligation. And so the obligation is twofold. There's the obligation of just protecting your wealth and, caring about your family, which you can achieve through estate planning. But then specifically, you have this obligation of the distribution of your wealth. And why this is so important, if you look at the Quran, particularly almost all of an inheritance law is in 2 verses of the Quran, verse 11 and 12 of Surah Nisa. And there it reads with fractions. And algebra was in part developed or invented to solve Islamic inheritance problems. Complex equations of Islamic law. And it's fascinating. That's a benefit to the society at large. And so it's impossible for us to fulfill that religious obligation until we make a plan to do so. It's possible that the surviving heirs will distribute wealth accordingly, but that's a hope, not a plan, right? That's just hopefully people will do what they're supposed to do. And sometimes it happens and often it doesn't. But that's why we lean towards trust so much, because you can define who gets what, and not just who gets what, but who owns what.
Mhm.
You know, between a husband and wife, this is not a normal conversation. Like, what's mine and what's yours, right? We've just got joint accounts, joint house, joint everything. We just throw it in the joint pile. Well, you know, under Islamic inheritance law, my mom and dad are entitled to a share of my wealth. And so, you know, they're entitled to 1/6. And 1/6 of what? Is it 1/6 of 100? Is it 1/6 of fee? Is it 1/6 of something else? If you've never had that conversation, you've never defined it, it would literally be impossible to implement the rule post-death. And so that's why this stuff is so important. That's why we prefer to use trusts over wills.
And attorneys that are familiar with this Sharia compliant or Islamically principled estate planning will ask those questions when you know, the person that needs it, like myself, I did this a few years ago, and we went through all those questions with the local person that handles it here. And he asked about, you know, what my wife brought into it, what I brought into it, what we brought in together. And so, you know, what that means later on, because part of what's going to happen is if I pass away first, some of the assets need to go to my assets, need to go to my parents, and others. But if my wife does, you know, her parents are also involved, right? So that's why it needs to be really talked about and figured out. So question for Amina, and this is for anyone, not just Muslim folks, but anyone. You know, we hear about probate, right? And sometimes you might hear on the news, this person didn't have a will or a trust, estate planning, and so, you know, it went into probate. What does that mean, and why do we want to avoid it under all cost?
That's a very good question. So the probate process is the process that takes place when someone passes away and they had assets that they had not designated properly through a revocable trust, as Yaser just explained. So in most states, there is a threshold amount of assets. For example, in Illinois, that threshold amount is $100,000. So if you pass away with over $100,000 in Illinois that are probate assets, meaning assets that do not have a beneficiary designation, even if you have a will, you still have to go through the probate court process before your property can be distributed to the heirs. This process is costly, it's time consuming. If you have real estate, the probate court process will take place in the county where the real estate is located. So if you have multiple pieces of real estate in various different counties, or if you have you know, a vacation home in Florida and you live in Illinois, you're going to go through, your family's going to go through the probate court process in Illinois and in Florida. So it takes time. Minimally, the probate process takes a year. In Illinois, I think most states, it's the same way. Many states actually take a lot longer. And that's if the situation is complex. The more there are assets, the more complications there are. If there are disputes between the beneficiaries, that process can take a lot longer. It can take several years. So most people who we talk to say they don't want to go through that probate court process. They don't want their loved ones have to deal with that. They would rather make sure that they have a revocable trust in place so that they can avoid the probate court process.
So that's a great answer. So thank you for that. So, you know, in you hear about this sometimes out there in the news, right? A number of years ago, Leona Helmsley, she was like a hotel heiress or something, right? She owned a lot of property and whatnot. So she passed away, and she gave a huge amount of money to a cat, her cat, to take care of that cat. Like, it was an unbelievable fortune that went there. Some people will say, you know, I don't like this person in my family. One of my kids has gone, you know, on the wrong side, right? Or this one here, I don't like the way that they color their hair, or whatever it happens to be. So I'm not going to give a portion of my will or my estate to them. So how are we supposed to handle this in Islam? What are the rulings on how you split money upon your death?
Great question. So Islamically, the shares that apply at death are set forth in the Quran. Surah Al-Nisa has the provisions regarding distribution to family members at death. Now, you cannot disown somebody who is entitled to inherit from you under the Islamic rules of inheritance. So if you don't like the fact that they color their hair purple, or if you don't like that they, drive a car that you don't like, as long as it's someone who is entitled to inherit from you and they have not disavowed Islam, you cannot disown them. There are examples. I've had clients who come to me and say, my child married somebody that I don't approve of. Well, can I disown them? Well, if the child is a practicing Muslim, no, just because they married someone that you don't like doesn't mean that you can disown them. They have a right to inheritance. It's their haqq, it's their right, and it actually takes effect when you're on your deathbed. And the Quran sets forth the shares. It depends on who your family members are at the time that you pass away, what they're entitled to. Generally speaking, between spouses, if a husband passes away, a wife inherits 1/8 of his assets. If a wife passes away, husband inherits 1/4 of her assets. If there is a parent who survives you, your parent is entitled to inherit 1/6 of your assets. Each parent who survives you is entitled to receive 1/6 of your assets. And then after that, if you have children who survive you, then your children are entitled to inherit, with sons receiving twice as much as daughters. Those are the very basic rules. Yeah. But beyond that, there are more complex rules, and they apply individually based on each person's situation. So it's very important to make sure you talk to someone who understands Islamic inheritance planning to really understand what applies in your specific situation.
And there is a lot of wisdom, obviously, behind, because it's in the Quran, it's told to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there's wisdom behind the rulings of why somebody's going to get a certain percentage, which moves me to my next question, Yaser, which is, there's the 33% rule, right? So everyone's supposed to get a percentage, right? The remaining family members that are there that are named are supposed to get a percentage, but you can take out 33% and you can categorize that for other reasons. Can you give that 33% to any of the people that are already entitled to it? And also, who else can you give it to?
Maybe if we took a step back at the high level of Islamic inheritance law. So you mentioned, Amina mentioned, these are, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions nasiban mafruḍa, like these are mandatory shares that are outlined in the Quran. And, in our sort of understanding of in general, people feel, what's mine is mine and I can do what I want with it. And the Quran here says no, right? It regulates the way you earn your wealth, and it regulates the way that you invest your wealth, right? Which is where you guys come in, and how you spend your wealth. And then that third component now is upon your death, you again don't have discretion to do what you want, but you're bound by these rules. And as I said earlier, these are the Quran talks about fasting and prayer and Hajj, but it doesn't give you the details. The details are found in the books of fiqh and the books of hadith. But when it comes to inheritance, they are detailed in the Quran. And that's what makes it so fascinating to study and learn. So at a high level, we start off with the first thing that a person is responsible for is the funeral costs and burial costs, right? That comes out first. Now, in most cases, the family will support that and take care of that. But that's something that if I'm planning for, I want to make sure happens. The second thing is debt, right? So debts that I owe to someone need to be memorialized, because within our tradition in particular, the Prophet ﷺ wouldn't pray janazas over people who had debts outstanding. And so it's really, really important, especially in a society where we're, buried in debt, that we have a plan for repayment of debt. When we think about estate planning, we're only thinking about the assets, but we also should be cognizant of the liabilities that we might have. And then the third part is this wasiyah, and in certain cultures, like, within Arab cultures, when people say we need to make a wasiyah, they're thinking of a will. But in the fiqh context, A wasiya refers to a discretionary optional share that you have, which you said is up to a third. And the key is it's up to a third. You can give up to a third. The rule is you can give that to anybody, but not someone who is going to inherit by right from the fara'id share, from the mandatory share. So the hadith is very explicit, right? I can't make a wasiya for a warith, for someone who's going to inherit. So in the normal context, it's parents, children, and spouse, right? The general close family. But of course, there's going to be situations where siblings might inherit, or grandparents, or so on and so forth. But generally, we're talking about parents, children, spouse, or more distant relatives if they're entitled to inherit. And I can't use the wasiya for them. But what I can do, and what we really highly encourage people to do, is to utilize that for their own sadaqah jariyah, right? So if you think about the opportunity to build endowments, to fund our institutions in, the Muslim community in America today, we're at this point where we're shifting from survival and creation to now sustainability. And so you have the ability to leave up to a third of wealth that is illiquid generally, right? Real estate, retirement accounts, stuff you don't have access to give in your life. Now, upon your death, you have the ability to donate, particularly retirement accounts, and the best type of assets to donate because it's pre-tax money. And if you take out the money or your beneficiaries take out that money, they're going to get taxed on it. But if if a charity receives those funds, then there's no tax that's due. And so it's a very, optimal way to utilize your wasiya share is to give to, your favorite relief organizations and charities and masajid and learning institutions. And that's sadaqah jariyah, right? That's the continuous perpetual charity, or family foundations or endowments that are built even within families.
Right.
And the last point I'll mention on that piece also is if a person has, we didn't talk too much about, estate taxes initially, but if a person is particularly high net worth to where the federal estate tax is applicable to them. So right now that's above $23 million. That might change under President-elect Biden. It might be cut in half. And so we'll see what happens. But the amount you leave to charity doesn't count. And so this is another opportunity to, rather than paying, a 40% tax to the government on estate taxes, you have the ability to, donate to charity, and that would count as a estate tax deduction as well. So a really, really valuable tool that is underutilized within our community through this concept of bequests and planned giving through the wasiya share, which is, part of our tradition. So highly encourage it.
Yeah, and I think in other communities, so the Muslim community is relatively young in America, learning some of this stuff. Some of the community knows this, but a lot of it doesn't. Yeah. So you'll find that somebody very wealthy passes away, and they give, $100 million to Stanford University upon their death, right? They give $50 million to Harvard, or they give it to March of Dimes or Children's Hospital or whatnot. So this is something we should do as well. And that's what Yaser is talking about, is we can do that up to 33%. We can't give $1 billion to our cat if we have $1 billion. Not something that's allowed. Just to further inspire people, I don't know if we mentioned, but if you have something to will, if you have something of value to give, it's a religious obligation for us not to go 2 nights without having a will, right? So what I would say is, look, if you don't have one yet, that should be inspiration enough or motivation enough to get started. But for those people that already have a trust, or they already have a will, and they have not considered the Islamic rules of inheritance, Amina, what can they do at this point? Is that something that you all can review? Can they go back to their counselor who may not be aware of these rules, but maybe they can learn about what would you do next for somebody like that?
They need to get started right away. Don't wait another day. You need to take action. That's the only way you're going to get a plan in place. If you pass away and you do not have a plan in place that you have put together, trust me, you still have an estate plan, but it's not the plan you want. It's called the Law of Intestacy, and it's your state's law that applies. Your state has a default estate plan in place for you that will apply if you pass away without having your own plan in place. It does not incorporate the Islamic rules of inheritance. It does not incorporate any charitable giving. It's a basic law that will be a different result from what you want. So if you want a plan in place with Islamic inheritance or in whatever provisions you want in place, you need to take action. You need to contact an attorney. Most of estate planning is federal law in nature. However, there is a good chunk of it that is state specific, which means that it's best to contact an estate planning attorney in your state, someone who understands inheritance planning law, and ideally someone who also understands Islamic inheritance planning. And contact them, set up an appointment. We're getting close to the end of the year. Yesterday, I just received a call from somebody who's going to end up paying a lot of money in taxes this year unless they get some tax planning in place. We're helping him do it. It's not too late. You may have some money that you can save in taxes if you get on the phone, get somebody to talk to you right now, and get the basics of a plan going. Look for an estate planning attorney in your council. You can contact your local bar association for your county and get a referral from them. If you need help, feel free to contact us. If Yaser or I know someone in your state, in your county, if we can't help, we'll be happy to refer you to somebody who can help you.
If people contact me as well, I know a number of attorneys that know how to do this throughout the country. But let's say someone calls you, Yaser, after this from Little City, Iowa, right? A very little city there. And they say, hey, can you handle this for me? I like the way you were presenting today. I'm going to call Amina next and find out, what she has to offer as well. But can you help me with this? You may not practice in Iowa. So what would you tell somebody in that situation?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think one that's probably on many people's minds is, you said find someone who knows this stuff, and there's not that many people that know this stuff, right? Yeah. But that said, every state is slightly different, right? And there's some nuance to the law in a particular jurisdiction. Some things are very sort of meta differences in regards to community property versus separate property, right? So those concepts are going to dictate part of the planning. And then there's specific things about rights that a widow might have, or a surviving heir may have under state law that have to be taken into context as well. So if someone's from a different jurisdiction, we try to co-counsel with attorneys in various jurisdictions and different states, particularly with regards to the local components of their plan. So if it's something that we can assist with, we'd be happy to. And if not, as Amina said, we can try to, find other practitioners or work with other practitioners, even ones that aren't necessarily Muslim or have any knowledge of the rules, right? Just to be able to assist with that planning work.
So I have about probably 10 more questions, and I wish I could ask them, but we have so many questions in the chat group as well. I'm going to turn to that.
Can I just add something?
Yeah, go ahead, Amina.
To what we were just talking about. I just want to emphasize the importance of talking to an attorney versus going online and downloading documents and just finding, a template for a will and filling in the blanks and thinking that you've taken care of this responsibility. That is a false sense of security. I would make sure that you do not do that. I discourage people from doing that because you can have a horrible result that comes from that, something that you did not intend, but you didn't really understand what you were doing. You thought you just needed a simple will, so you took care of that, and your family isn't actually protected, doesn't have everything in place because the things that you really needed were not part of that plan. So I would strongly encourage you to see an attorney. Don't just go online and use a template and download some will that may or may not make sense in your situation. And that will alone will not be your full estate plan. It won't be the power of attorney documents you need, the guardianship documents you need for your children. It's really important that you understand the full scope of the documents you really need in your situation.
So I agree in general that, we don't change our own oil. We don't, most of us don't, right? We're not doing our own mechanical work. For a lot of people, they go to experts to do that, right? And so the consequences of not doing that in this case are far worse than messing up your car, right? It's messing up your whole family, messing up, a lot of stuff. That said, I do think that, like you mentioned, less than 10% of Muslims have any sort of planning, and something is better than nothing in many cases. And so particularly guardianship of children, right? Like if you're a parent and you've got children, like you should at least have that in place, right? If nothing else. Yeah. And so we have this free Islamic will template that or app that we created that works in simple cases. It has all of the limitations that I described. It doesn't cover joint property. It doesn't cover beneficiaries. It still goes to probate, all of those things, but it's a better than nothing solution. And so if somebody wants to use that as a stopgap before they get to their attorney and before they develop a whole comprehensive estate plan, a lot of people have found that to be a good sort of in between, not necessarily a substitute, but something to get them there. So that's www.muslim.estate.
Hey, Yaser, quick question for you. We're gonna try to get some quick answers from you all on this. These are questions from folks out there. So somebody says, if I had a non-Muslim lawyer who really didn't, I mean, it's fine to have a non-Muslim lawyer, but in this case, they didn't know about the Islamic rules of, wealth, estate planning. If they prepared it, let's say a long time ago, what sorts of things do I need to do to adapt it from an Islamic standpoint is the question.
So, I mean, fundamental among those is to make sure that the distribution provisions are consistent with Islamic law, right? And so you either take that information back to your attorney who drafted the documents and say, look, I want to update them in a way that is consistent with Islamic law, and here's how I'm going to help you do that. Or you can then either contact somebody who understands those rules or tell your attorney to contact somebody who understands those rules. So, we get this kind of question a lot, and it works in different ways, either directly with the client or assisting the attorney in, helping redraft the documents to comply with Sharia.
Amina, I'll ask this question and let's see if you can understand it. Relisting children as secondary beneficiaries, right? Instead of like, if you don't have any secondary beneficiary, is this appropriate when one has minor children, or do we need a separate document to handle financial affairs of minors?
That's a great question, whoever asked that. So when I say have a secondary beneficiary, you have your children as secondary beneficiaries, that's a stopgap measure. That's better than not having a secondary beneficiary, because let's say you have your spouse as your primary beneficiary. You're both out together, you get in a car accident, you're gone. If you don't have a second beneficiary, you're going to end up in probate court. Your assets or whatever that account is going to go through probate. So having your children as secondary beneficiaries at least make sure that you don't immediately end up going to probate court. However, if your children are minors and they are the secondary beneficiary, then you may still end up having a probate court problem. What happens in those situations is, in many states, this is state specific, but in many states, if you have minor children who are the beneficiaries, then they have to have a guardian appointed, a legally appointed guardian by a court. And that person has to go to court on an annual basis until the child turns 18 and make a report to the court.
That sounds like a lot of work, Amina, and there's going to be a lot of details behind that. Yes. I'm going to save us, save you for that person that asked. They can ask you that question and get a little bit more detail from you. But in order to answer some of these other ones, let me ask you this other one. Who are the relatives that can inherit from a person? And another question that's related, are there rules in Islam regarding how the wealth should be divided? Are we free to make those decisions on our own? I think we already answered that. You're not allowed to make those decisions on your own except for the 33%. So who are the relatives in a short, answer? Who are they that can inherit from you?
That really, it depends on, that's a fact specific situation question. So it depends on who your relatives are. If they're, we can't answer that generally. It's, it depends. Do you have parents surviving? Do you have a spouse? Do you have children? Mm-hmm. Do you have daughters only daughters, sons and daughters. There are a lot of specifics involved in answering that question.
Yeah.
So I think we've also already answered it in a general point of view, because we've specified the share amounts for parents, for spouses, and for children. But beyond that, it really depends on your specific situation.
So there is an Islamic inheritance calculator online. I don't know how accurate that is, but if you want to go check that out, you can, and then still go see someone, to advise you on it. Yaser, how can you set aside money in your lifetime for your spouse so they don't have to come, so it doesn't come under this ruling where, all of it's going to go to all of these different places and that spouse is not going to get enough? How can you do that while you're living?
Yeah, so that's I think one of the core decisions and conversations is, and I see this in the chat as well, is who owns what, right? And California law, as well as all these community property jurisdictions, assumes it's 50-50, regardless of which spouse is earning it. And that's a default assumption. So you can opt out of that default assumption if both spouses want to. What we can't do is change the fractions, right? So the Quranic fractions are unambiguous, clear verses. So we can't say, well, this doesn't apply anymore. What you have the ability to do is essentially change the pie, right? So you can take out the third. You can also gift in your lifetime, no problem. So I get this question all the time. An eighth is not enough for my wife. I want to make sure that she gets much more than that. And so we tell her, well, why don't you gift while you're alive? And then they say, well, I don't love her that much, right? And so that's obviously not the approach. Now, lifetime gifting, you can give, you can buy a house, you can do anything you want in your lifetime and gift your children, gift your daughters, gift your spouse, or gift the opposite way. That's all fine, as long as you're not intentionally depriving someone or doing little injustice to someone. Gifting is a great way. Now, there's tax consequences to gifts and stuff. I'm not going to get into that now. But you can gift such that you own nothing on death, and then you have nothing to distribute. You can donate to charity and gift all to your relatives. And
this is where professionals come in, right? So in this line of work, you have folks like these two attorneys here. And then on the tax side, you have other people. And so it makes sense to get people involved like that. Another quick question for you, then I'll ask one to Amina. How often should a will or trust be updated?
Major life events, right? So somebody's born, somebody dies. We just had one yesterday where a guy had shares in a startup that were almost not worth anything when we set up the plan. And he called me yesterday and said they got acquired by a company and now they're worth significantly more than he had anticipated, right? So mashallah to him. That's not normally the case, right? But any major life event is when you're going to want to update this stuff.
Got it. All right, Amina, somebody is asking, they may be moving to another state. Does that affect their will or trust?
It can. So if you move, your documents will still be effective, but best practice is to have it reviewed by an attorney in that new state to make sure that it's in compliance with all state-specific rules.
Got it. Very good. And Yaser, if this person's husband passes away and they do not have any sons, nor is his father with us anymore, do his sisters and brothers get a share?
All right, so technical questions.
Yes.
Yeah, so if there's no male heirs, ascendants or descendants, then it's going to go to siblings. The sibling, basically the presence of a male child or a male parent, grandparent, lineal ascendant would serve to bar any lateral distribution. So any siblings. So right. To the extent that a person only has daughters and doesn't have a father or grandfather or something like that, then siblings would inherit. Again, this is one of those things where you've got to, you got to analyze the situation to understand who's going to inherit. And I guess that makes one point. When we draft trust, it's important to say, okay, well, how do you determine who's going to inherit, right? There's different approaches people take. Like some people will just slap a thing on the back and say, according to Islamic law, whatever this says, right? Another approach is to say, okay, well, these are the people who inherit as of today, right? If I were to pass away, and then there's a mechanism for recalculating within the document.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I prefer that type of approach where, at least there's clarity as of who inherits today. And then to the extent someone dies, someone's born life happens, there's a concurrent simultaneous death, that there's a mechanism for ensuring that it's always correct.
There's also a really good question here, which is a real life issue. So let's say you have a $500,000 home, it's fully paid off. One of the spouses passes away. There's children, there's a spouse left. So money has to go to multiple different places. Do you have to sell that home and pay out everything? Or would you be able to try to construct something, because they're coming to you as a professional, beforehand, to be able to make it where everyone can still live in the home and it can be handled in a different way? Amina, how would you handle that?
So as long as it's done ahead of time, you can definitely have a plan in place to make sure that everyone's interests will be protected from a state-specific, from an Islamic law perspective. We have a conversation with the family, understand what the priorities are, what the goals are, and you can design a trust to make sure that the house will not have to be sold. No one will be put out of their home and left without the home that the only home they've known for the last 20 years. You don't want that kind of situation to happen. Without a plan in place, yes, that can definitely happen. But with a plan, you structure a trust in a way where surviving spouse can continue to live in the house, but there is a mechanism in place to make sure that any distributions that need to be made to other beneficiaries can be made.
One other question came up here. Do stepchildren, I want to get to this because I think this happens quite often. Do stepchildren also inherit according to Islamic rules of estate planning?
So the inheritance rules are based on relations by either blood or marriage. So stepchildren wouldn't inherit by right. Adopted children wouldn't inherit by right. They are allowed to inherit from the wasiyah share, from the discretionary share. And the other important one is if the relatives are not Muslim, that would also serve as a bar to inheritance from the mandatory share. So again, it's an important one for people who are converts or who have Muslims or family members who are not Muslim as well.
First of all, we thank you all for your engagement today. You stayed with us the entire time. One of the things that you have to make a decision on is, all right, now you have your trust, Amina, Yaser, somebody else helped you with it. And, upon your death, who's going to manage that, right? So there's the trustee. And so in some cases, you might say, well, the children are going to be taken care of. My minor children are going to be taken care of by this person. My finances are going to be taken care of by this person. It might be a brother, a friend, or somebody else. They may not have expertise. How do you usually handle this? And Yaser, you can answer this, and then Amina, and then we'll end on that.
Yeah, you got to trust your trustee. It's the most important decision you're going to make. Who are the guardians? Who are the trustees? So that's something that, it's part of the counseling process, is helping you think through who is best suited. And if you don't have someone, then maybe we go to a corporate trustee, a professional who that's their job, right? They know how to do this. As long as the documents are drafted appropriately, then they're going to implement your wishes.
How about you, Amina?
I would say the exact same thing. So the trustee, you should be someone that you have 110% trust in. If you don't have 110% trust in that person, don't name them as trustee. And if you may have someone who you want to name as trustee because you know that they're going to take care of your kids, love your kids, but maybe that person doesn't have good financial sense. Well, that's also a problem. You need to make sure that you name someone who has the wherewithal to make sure that they're doing everything properly. And sometimes in those situations, maybe you divide the role. So you have someone who has a corporate trustee who is in charge of investment making decisions, and then you have somebody else involved as a co-trustee, a family member. So there are many different options for corporate trustees. You can go to the financial institution where you have investments. For example, for Amana Mutual Funds, there's Saturna Trust Company based in Nevada, and they provide trustee services for Muslims all over the country. They understand Islamic inheritance law, of course, because of working with Amana. And they also understand culturally some of the things that are important to Muslim families. And that's a difference from having, for example, Fidelity or Schwab serve as your trustee, because they're not necessarily going to understand the nuances of cultural issues, and Islamic inheritance and Islamic finance issues.
Well, I thank you both. Thank you for all of those answers. I actually learned a few things as well today. I thought I knew a lot of this, but I learned some new things. And please do reach out to Amina and Yaser, or both of them. You can also reach out to me. We can start off with an email address, which I put in the chat group, which is omd@saturna.com, or Oscar Mary David, OMD. So ask any questions, right? Do you need an attorney somewhere? Do you need a trustee for your living trust? Did you not get one of the questions, the answers to one of the questions? We'd be able to help you with all those things, and we'd appreciate you contacting us anytime. So until next month, thank you to our speakers, in particular, Yaser and to Amina. We appreciate you very much. It's great to have professionals like you in the Muslim community throughout the United States. Take care, everyone. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Please consider an investment's objectives, risks, charges, and expenses carefully before investing. To obtain this and other important information, which you should carefully consider before investing, about the Amana Funds in a free prospectus or summary prospectus, please visit amanafunds.com or call 1-800-728-8762.